But people at shopping at Home Depot, they know they're buying redwood or not? Is it like
They
hidden?
do.
Is it just some generic wood type?
No, it's redwood. It's usually a little bit more expensive than the other stuff, and everyone wants it because redwood traditionally had rot-resistant and insect-resistant properties. But those properties are really associated with the old-growth redwood. That old-growth redwood had very tight grain and it had been impregnated with resins for thousands of years, so it was very strong. It didn't rot very well. It lasted for a really long time. The second-growth redwood does not have the same level of properties, but people still associate it with that. It's like, okay, a deck, I want redwood. I want a fence, I want redwood. And this whole sort of consumer-based resistance to buying redwood has been muddied by the forest certification process. So the FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council, which I think started out on the right foot, has kind of started to take some wrong steps and has started to be influenced more and more by the timber industry. So it used to be very difficult to be rated as sustainable. Now it's quite easy, and there's been some lawsuits going on further north with the Environmental Protection Information Center is suing Blue Diamond Industries, for example, for clear cutting on redwood lands, large scale clear cuts, the old style 100, 200 acre clear cuts, and they have that approved by FSC as sustainable redwood logging. Doesn't make any sense. So people go into Home Depot, they say, ooh, sustainable, FSC is certified sustainable redwood. All right, I'm gonna buy that, I'm being green, I'll go build my deck and away I go. I've always tried to kind of walk the line between kind of the conservationists and the preservationists, if you will. Well, we need some timber products, so we should probably harvest it. In the last little while, I've kind of got to the point of like, you know what? Why not just stop? At least I can say that. No one's going to listen to me, but why don't we just lock up this whole biome? If it really can sequester that much carbon, and we're in as much trouble as people like Dr. Gershenson say we're in, why not just lock up the whole biome and let it work for us to sequester carbon instead of using inferior products to build fences and decks? It just seems like the value of it as a living system is much greater than the value of it as a timber product. And I think that'll take legislation. It'll have to be a top-down approach to some degree. It'd be great if everyone just said, I'm not going to buy redwood, but I think realistically, that won't have a profound effect on it. It'll have to come from the government to some degree. Jerry Brown, who I supported for president several times, worked on his campaigns. I am just deeply disappointed with him. A lot of his campaign contributions came from Sierra Pacific Industries, the biggest landholder in California, the biggest timber company in California. And he has really been corporate toady, which is a word that he applied to Bill Clinton in the election back in 1992. He said, Bill, you're a corporate toady. Well, Jerry, look at what you're doing. I mean, giving millions of dollars to the timber industry for carbon sequestration, and not for not harvesting, but for continuing to harvest, I think it's corruption, really. And we're going to have to address that if we're going to make any kind of changes in terms of forest policy. Yeah.
Just sort of riffing on that a little bit, going back to Dr. Richardson's talk, whenever it was 2 weeks ago, we often think about substitution, input substitution, what else can we use? And kind of going back to that original physics problem, really the idea is don't use so much. And that's what it keeps coming back to, is reusing. It has to be economically competitive to reuse all of the stuff that we're putting in the landfill, going to Bruce Olszewski's issues. I mean, really, it's reducing and reusing and living smaller and healthier it affects everything down the line. So, I mean, how we get there from here, now that's your job, policy, but how we get there from here is really it's a combination of culture and regulation, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
internalizing externalities.
I bring it up just because it seems like an organization like Save the Redwoods would be in a good position to challenge the certifications that are in Home Depot. I mean, if everybody's shopping at Home Depot, is there a social movement to say, hey, this is actually, you think you're buying an eco-label product, but it's just a label. It's not actually.
Starts here today.
Okay.
I love the Save the Redwoods League, but I have to caution everyone about our beloved nonprofit organizations. There has been a growing culture of pay-to-play on the boards of nonprofits, and because of that, the boards of groups like the Save the Redwoods League have been infiltrated by the timber industry. They now have members from Blue Diamond on the board of Save the Redwoods League. So
I still call it a board.
I watched this happen to Sempervirens Fund right before my eyes, and the executive director and myself and a couple other people were saying, no, don't do it. They're trying to buy you out. A year later, everyone was fired, a whole new group of people, and they are promoting timber harvesting on their new purchase, the Cemex property, San Vicente. The very first timber harvest plan submitted by the Sempervirens Fund, a group that was started for the sole purpose of preserving redwood forest. So right now, I don't think there's any large-scale movement to fight FSC. And it's a difficult task. So I've been kind of hammering on various grad students saying, hey, let's attack this one, let's attack that one. But there's so many big issues going on that it's a big effort to do that. And people want to feel good about what they're doing, and we have this FSC thing, so like, oh, what, do we have to throw that out? Then what are we going to do? What am I going to build my deck out of? I was faced with this a couple of years ago. I bought a new house that had a 750 square foot deck, redwood deck. More square footage than really in the house. Right? Huge deck. And rotten and falling down. So like, what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do? What am I going to replace it with? Well, the final decision was we're not going to replace it. Maybe we shouldn't be building 750 foot decks out in the mountains where it rains, 50 inches a year. They're going to rot out in a few years. So it's a change in culture, as Rachel says. It's a change in mindset. And what do we need? What do we really need? Do we need to be building giant decks and redwood fences? Or maybe there's other approaches to how we can enjoy our land, how we can create privacy without using so much wood product.
And even a ceramic style patio with in-ground, there's many things that we just don't have to be out of Sunset Magazine this week. We can be out of the 1930s Homesteader magazine
Right.
instead.
Yeah, or just a big bunch of dirt with some wildflowers on it. I don't know.
So I was curious, you talk about like how Trillium doesn't like disturbance from logging, but what about other disturbances like fire? How do they play a role with fire? Not play a role with fire?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I haven't studied it per se in relation to fire, but redwood forests in general do pretty well through fire, and so what I would guess, and I could actually go back on some of my data and see what I can find, but post-fire, I would expect to see Trillium come back fairly quickly if the fire wasn't too hot. So
Just get another actively burning big basin.
What's that?
I mean, they're actively burning for
Whatever
big basin.
vegetation is, right, the prescribed burdens. Those prescribed burdens are done in such a way that they're not terribly hot and they're not going to disturb soil to the depth where I think it would affect Trillium populations much. That would be my guess. The other thing is that those types of fires, and most fires in the redwood forest for that matter, tend to happen on a very small geographic scale. You don't have huge standard placing fires the way you have in the Sierra Nevada, for example. So it creates a patchwork within the forest, which allows for diversity without setting back species in the way that you might in a different forest type.
Would it be possible to manufacture like new redwood forests besides conservation and preservation methods?
To grow forests essentially where they haven't been before?
Maybe, I mean, maybe where they haven't grown before, but in also sites that that are almost very similar to the ones in Northern California in different places.
There has been some attempts at that, and there are some amazing redwood forests growing in New Zealand where they are not native to. They only natively grow in California, a little bit of Oregon. They started planting redwoods in New Zealand about almost 100 years ago, and they have huge dramatic stands of redwood there, which are sequestering carbon the same way they are here. So potentially it could be used in areas to for whatever purpose to grow it, and there's been experiments with that. It has a fairly narrow range of ecological tolerances. It doesn't like frost, it doesn't like the dry, it likes summer moisture in particular, as well as winter moisture. So here in California, it's limited to the coastal fog belt. And so you'd have to find places in the world that had all those conditions intact so that it could survive. But there are such places. And where there are not, there are other species which may not sequester quite as much carbon as redwood, but can sequester quite a bit. So in those cases, it might be better to focus on the intact forests in those regions. We have enough intact forests around the world right now that if we were to try to lock up old growth forests even, we could do a lot for climate change in that way. But growing new forests is something that's worth considering as well.
Yeah, although sorry, you go, Marta.
Okay, I just had a quick question about sequestering, since you were talking about making a deck and all that. So you mentioned that the redwood is pretty much like the best tree for sequestering carbon, like it could store up to 6 tons, right?
I think I had 1,600 for 2 large trees.
Well, I was just wondering, so say, you said when harvesting occurs, like some of it's released back into the atmosphere, is all of that carbon stored within the wood, or does some of it get transferred in other places such as the soil?
Well, about half of the carbon's underground.
Okay.
So when you cut down a tree, cut down a redwood tree, that timber goes to do whatever it's going to do, and what's left in the ground starts to senesce as well and release carbon. So the root systems, even though in redwoods the whole root system doesn't die out the way it does in other forest types, it will start to senesce. It will die back, and the more often you harvest it, the less biomass, less carbon you're going to have in the soil as well. So managed forests hold a lot less carbon, not only above ground but below ground. So every time you harvest it, you're releasing carbon from the ground as well as from the timber that you're taking out.
Ask you one last question. We have a couple minutes. What are the main differences between the old growth forests that you see in Mendocino versus Santa Cruz? Is their composition different because of the different climate extremes, or?
A little bit. The main difference is there's a lot less in Mendocino than there is in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz was an area where some of the early preservationists got excited. Big Basin State Park is the first state park in California. We have Henry Cowell. We have so many places where redwoods are preserved in Santa Cruz. Mendocino was sort of the epicenter of clear cutting and cut and run forestry. So there's just not a lot of old growth up there. And there are some differences across the whole range in terms of understory plant species, for example, and overstory plant species as well. In Mendocino, you have the beginning of the Sitka spruce range, which goes all the way up into Alaska. So you have some of that. You have hemlock mixed in. And in the understory, you have rhododendron, some other species. So it's a little bit of a different climate. And apparently the trees themselves are genetically distinct as well. In Santa Cruz, you have a lot more recruitment from seed than you have in Mendocino. So these Santa Cruz redwoods are better able to deal with a variety of different types of conditions than the Mendocino types. The Mendocino types are solidly in that foggy, low disturbance regime, where Santa Cruz, I more and more think that the Santa Cruz Mountains is a biome that's the best protector from climate change because of the adaptability of so many of the species, the Monterey Trench bringing up cool water. So, when it all goes down, just come to the Santa Cruz Mountains, we'll still be talking about that.
Could I just add one more thing about the idea of developing new redwood forests elsewhere? I didn't want to leave one little piece out, which is that there's more to the forest than the trees. And if you put redwoods in New Zealand, you do have big redwoods, and you might have carbon storage, but you don't have Trillium, you don't have the birds, and you don't have the bats, you don't have all the things we've been talking about. You don't have a co-evolved ecosystem. What you have is a zoo with some redwoods, which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not, I wasn't sure that was completely obvious from the conversation.
Yeah, I was
Just
talking
so
more
we're-
of like a sequestering carbon like scenario.
Yeah, truly carbon, I
Yeah,
understand,
right.
but I think that
That's a good point.
some of us get nervous when we start reducing down carbon too much.
Right.
Right, I appreciate you bringing that up, and we have to think about what are we replacing if we're going to start planting redwood everywhere in the world to try to sequester carbon.
Right.
What used to be there? What native species used to live there that we're evicting by doing that? It's sort of like the solar solar farm idea. Well, great, we have solar energy and now we killed a whole lot of tortoises. So the best place to grow redwoods is where it naturally grows. And so I would suggest that we first deal with this area. We have more authority here as well. It's our state, it's our country. We can put pressure on our elected officials and so forth. And we could really maximize carbon sequestration in the redwoods pretty easily and quickly because it recovers naturally. We don't have to do anything to manage it. All we have to do is stop. That's really it. Just stop. Stop cutting it down. It's going to grow. It's going to grow fast, and it's going to sequester carbon quickly.
On that note, let's thank Dr. Russell for spending time with us.
All right. Well, I appreciate the chance to talk with you all about that.
Thank you so much.